I think there's an educational hope.
Yeah.
And it probably, and you could speak to it, it probably, culturally for you, it's not out of a bad place. They actually just want you to succeed and, right, have a great life. And maybe there's something about representing the family. I don't know. But how this podcast came to be was, this is not about me at all. This podcast isn't about me.
Yeah, but I'd love to hear about it.
Well, so we try not to tell the story too much, but I have a friend of mine he works at a company called Road ID in Covington, and they're really successful. They kind of invented this ID that you wear when you're doing athletic things, running, surfing, so that if you have heart problems or have a health issue, right, you know what the information is, who to call, all that. But they've turned it into a sports fashion thing. And they started out of a little house in Fort Mitchell. He was their second employee. Now they work out of a multi-million-dollar facility in Covington. Their sales are $25 million a year. Like, just out of a...
Yeah.
Isn't it wild what's happening with business
crazy.
these days?
Yeah.
So he came to me and he said he was been doing podcasting for 10 years, back when it wasn't even popular.
Yeah.
And so he said, man, you've always got something to say. You should have a podcast. And I went, well, here's the problem with podcasts. When I listen to Joe Rogan, when I listen to a guy named Patrick Bet-David, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. It's a company called Valuetainment. When I hear these guys, what they do a great job is it's not about them.
Right.
Because who wants to hear about someone talking about themselves all the time? Not a lot of people. Not a lot of people. We like to talk about ourselves, but no one else wants to hear it. And so Mike said, you have a lot to say. And I said, I'm not as interested in that. I want to talk to other people to fill my curious mind. Right. And what's happened here is we have gone out to find the best podcast studios, not just in the city, in the region, around the country. Yep. And he put together one heck of a studio. And the conversations we're starting to have are not just with, local business people and entrepreneurs. Right. There's some people nationally that are starting to listen and hear. And we had a social media expert as we get in to talk about Pranav. Is that right? Again? It's like one Pranav. It's like one syllable almost, even though it's two.
I've actually mispronounced my name, but you pronounce it better.
Okay, man.
Pranav is exactly right.
Pranav, okay. And then, so we had a social media expert. He's probably one of the best. His name's Kyle Draper. He's out of Dallas. He came in 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had an Instagram specialist out of Phoenix that came in, and they were teaching our company. And we sat down, and these people were starting to realize, like, wow, okay, this thing has a voice. And she texted me from Phoenix 2 days ago, and she said, Mark, that podcast, what's happening in there, it's unique. Yep. And what's weird is when you do something unique, as we talk about you, I don't know if we appreciate how unique it is.
Well, that's probably true, because they all have a unique twist to everything.
Right? And it's just our unique way that we've processed
That's
it.
Exactly right.
So, all these credentials, what in the... When Mike gives me the credentials here, I'm like, who is this coming in here? Who am I talking to? Is this like somebody in there, like, supposed to be Bill Gates, or, are you kidding me? The only thing you're missing on here is like a PhD from like MIT or something, man. What in the world?
No, the plan was not to have a PhD, and everything happens by accident rather than design, which is interesting.
I love that. All right, so everything when you say stuff, we go deep. So everything happens by accident and not design.
Yeah, at least in that part of the part.
Well, you said everything. So let's go down.
Sure.
So how did you become who you are? I don't know if you're older or younger than me. I don't know. You have the good looking, good tone of skin. I'm just this pale guy with this Caucasian skin, and you can like brand and date me.
But you got charisma.
Okay, charisma. Okay.
Exactly.
So how'd you become to be like who you are?
No, it's interesting. I think you talked about the education and the PhD part, but my plan was just to be a doctor, nothing else. That was my mission. And here I am. You kind of figured out what does it take to be a doctor, and there's an option, right? You get your bachelor's degree, and then you go to a med school, and there you go. So now you have a chance. What do you do your bachelor's degree in? So I asked around. I was like, what do I do? My goal is to get to a med school. And they said, well, if my uncle said, you be an engineer, that might be not a bad idea. I said, okay, what kind of an engineer? It's like, there are two kinds there. They're always going to be in demand, electrical and mechanical. I'm like, okay, electrical sounds fun enough and tough enough. Let's go do it. So I ended up going to get a degree in electrical engineering, did a pre-med, get into a med school, and life hits me. That's why I said it's an accident. So the story is, just before I started college, my father passed away in a car accident. I have a younger brother who was hearing impaired. We had just moved from India. Mother didn't speak much English, if you would imagine. So then you finished your bachelor's degree, and you're like, okay, 4 more years of med school, and then you got 4 more years of residency and specialties, and you have family, and what do? The med doesn't sound too good. You're probably 32 and you probably have $1 million debt, and now you're thinking about starting it. So, to your point, at that point, said, okay, fine, scratch that. Not going to med school. So then what do? You have 2 options. You can start working, or you do something else. And it's like, well, obviously I can't spend 8 years, but I could spend probably 1 more year to do a grad school. So I go to grad school, get my master's degree. And
in engineering as well?
In engineering as well.
Yep.
Right.
So you got your undergrad in electrical engineering.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And then you go to grad school and continue this engineering path.
Yeah.
The whole time, you really don't know where it's leading.
That's exactly right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You just make a decision and say, hey, I'm going to follow this path.
Right.
What will happen is, because I want you to continue with this, when we get to this place where you're now a founder and CEO of Meditech, which we're going to get into.
Yep.
What we find through entrepreneurship and what we found through our conversations are that it just doesn't happen overnight.
Nope.
And this Instagram world and a lot of young people, I don't like saying, so I'm 42.
Yeah.
And I hated when I was older or when I was younger, and the older generations would say, you guys just don't know. And I feel sorry for our world in the future. And what are you doing? And when you're in control of running the world, it's going to be terrible. I hope I'm gone. And so I think that if they would have looked back in their life, though, to this point,
Yep.
make any business plan in 2 or 3 months, you're probably going to have to shred it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of how life evolves.
That's exactly right.
So you go to grad school.
Yeah.
To go to get your MBA probably in engineering. Or is it an MBA, or there's not an MBA in engineering, but what is it?
Yeah,
How's
it's
this
very similar. They call it Masters in Science.
Okay.
Yeah. So you do that, and I finish it off, and then going back to the dilemma, right? This is around the .com era.
Oh, yeah.
And you're hot in demand. Everybody wants to hire engineers. I had about 12 or so offers. And all of a sudden, a professor and a few grad students were starting a startup. And I thought, that's probably pretty cool. I'd learn a lot, and somehow they convinced to join them. So I joined them. So we actually founded this company. And that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. I think I loved every bit of it. We built the product, raised the funding. Obviously, .com thing hit. The company got sold. We returned some tiny bit of money to our investors. Mm-hmm. But that experience was interesting, obviously unplanned, right?
How long did you do that?
That was about 2 years.
Okay.
That was about 2 years.
Okay. What were you, 23, 24, 25?
Yeah.
Somewhere in there?
I think by the time we got out, I was probably about 23.
Okay.
When we finished the first startup.
So you're one of those young, smart guys.
I don't know, young. It's just that life happens.
Yeah.
The option was there.
Yeah.
If there was no option, I probably would have picked, the traditional, one of the jobs.
Or continued down this path of becoming a doctor.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. I think that was scratched.
Do you think, why was it scratched?
Going back to once I was into that path, it could have happened that I would have probably earned enough money and thought about going back, because it still remained with me for some period of time. The family did say, hey, you want to go back? And I think now I'm actually happy that I didn't become a doctor. I don't think I could stick to just that routine for too long. Mm-hmm.
You would have had to be in a specialty for sure.
Even if I was in specialty, I mean, you could have different problems. I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
But it still be relatively confined
It is.
into an area.
Yeah, like
And
if
so-
somebody
yeah.
if somebody's an ophthalmologist, right, and they
Exactly.
end up becoming a retinal surgeon,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, well, we've taught you how to work on people's torn retinas.
That's right.
There may be an evolution of technology a little bit,
Yeah.
but this is kind of what you're doing every day.
Yeah.
And to your point, I bet is culturally, was there a ton of pressure for you to fulfill that and do this doctor thing? Was there?
That was a good point. I think you're getting to a point where most of the Indians, there's probably a little bit of a cultural pressure. You want to be a doctor or engineer. In fact, I was lucky enough I didn't have it. So I'll take you reverse back.
Yeah.
The way it worked in India, where I finished my high school, after you get the 10th, finish your 10th, in 11th, 12th, you get to pick whether you get to go into the business side or an engineering side. And my dad was an engineer. My uncle's a doctor. Other uncle was an engineer. So there was this thing that I had to go into that route. But funny enough, that usually does not happen in Indian families. My dad pulled me on a side and said, son, you don't have to go into science if you want to go into a commerce. And I looked at him and I said, are you really having this conversation? Because
you really said that? Like
Exactly.
that was bad? Really? So at 16 or 17, because I guess the expectation was you just do this.
Yeah.
So you said, whoa. So it threw you for a loop.
Exactly. Then I look back and I no, but I just want to be a doctor. But I was given that option, and I think usually, to your point, that's not always
Acceptable.
there.
Yeah. That's really cool. It is. I think the funny thing is, for me, having some friends that
Right.
they're from India, and I knew this cultural thing. They've
Right.
shared it with me, but I don't know if that's indifferent from every family, no matter what country or place you come from. I think there's an educational hope.
Yeah.
And it probably, and you could speak to it probably, culturally for you, it's not out of a bad place. They actually just want you to succeed and have a great life, and maybe there's something about representing the family. I don't know.
Yeah, I think now that I can think more deeper into it, I think it's a probability, right? People would think about if there's a culture, you're in a place where there is less resources and more demand, you kind of look at it and say, look, which path should you take that you'll have more comfortable
Life. Yeah.
So now you're teaching to take less risk, quite honestly.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You're starting down a path. So go do this, you'll have a great job, or you'll have you'll be a doctor, you'll do great things, and then you move with the life. And now when you relate it, the entrepreneurship, right? Obviously, it's all relative things, but if you think about this country, United States, if you will, now things are changing, but entrepreneurship is a hallmark, right? And the reason that is we actually have allowed for a long period of time for people to take the risk,
Yep. And
follow the passion,
Yes.
right? That risk awareness thing was really pulled out. So I think that's a value.
Yeah. So I think probably, and I bet that's not unique to India.
Probably
Right?
not.
I think it's
No,
rife
any
across
place.
the world.
Yeah.
Failure may be looked down on, where I think here, you hear certain people out in the world say that they like to fail. And I push back on that. I mean, there's some big person. I'm like, hey, listen, I don't like it. It feels terrible
Yep.
when you fail. But I think that if you can learn to embrace it,
Yeah.
that's kind of the secret sauce to the success of entrepreneurship, to commerce. Because I personally, I don't know about you, and to speak to it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but me personally, I haven't learned my best things from my successes.
No.
I've learned them from the failures, and they hurt, but that's when you learn you have to do something different and better and reevaluate yourself. And so this path that you've gone down, so I want to hear how Pranav, the engineer,
Yeah.
was successful in a professional corporate world,
Yeah.
right? How in the world does that lead down a path to become a board of director of companies, to then become a president of, I think, Resilient,
Yep.
right? And then say, now it's time. How does this happen? Is it a slight progression throughout life and all these? What is this?
It is. The first startup taught me a few things.
Mm-hmm. What did it teach you? Yeah.
Yeah, I learned a lot about business acumen. I learned a lot about technology, market, even the strategic insights, right? How do you place a bet and so on and so forth. The one thing that I did not have was the fact that I did not learn the leadership to scale, right? I think
Speak
earlier
to
on,
that. Yep.
yeah, early on when you're doing entrepreneurship, it's more experimentation. You make it happen, you make it work. It's scrappy. Every employee has their incentives aligned. Everybody is rowing in the same direction. As you scale your business, all of a sudden, not everybody has the same stake as you do or the earlier set of people do. And scaling is then you have to have processes, you have to be able to lead people and have that momentum going. And you would realize, I think there are 4 stages I think about that a very successful entrepreneur has to go through. The first one, he or she has to be an innovator. Whatever that may be. Innovation doesn't have to be technical. It could be, how do I do a great design? How do I have a great retail experience? Whatever that turns out to be. From innovator, you have to transition to an entrepreneur. Now you're taking a risk. You're making a bet, and you're persevering through it. You have a lot of failure. Mm-hmm. From an entrepreneur, you have to become a great manager. And from manager, you have to get to a great leader. That's how you scale from nothing to multi-billion dollar company. And not everybody is able to do it. When I looked at myself at that point, I think I could have created another startup right after that. Even I thought about it, and I even tried it. But then I realized, nobody's going to let me run the company. And even if I did it, I probably wouldn't be as good. I need to learn that leadership element.
Okay, so how can you, I'll pick back up in a second, but how can you have that self-awareness that you're talking about? How can you have that, but it not bury your confidence?
Yeah. It's a failure, to your point. I was punching above my weight. I wanted to run the show because I could see I could do it. Strategically was there. But I knew I wasn't as mature probably to lead that. And part of it comes from life experiences, to be honest. I mean, just having, losing a father, taking responsibility for a full family, going to school, working, all that sort of thing. Really, you'd spend more time that you're not doing something, reflecting, and probably gives you that point. So it's a combination of me wanting to do more, but I know that I was falling short, and then ability to just reflect at the point in time. So I think that was the point where I said, I need to learn that other element.
So that piece, so I agree, for me being a operator, an entrepreneur, starting this thing and owning buildings and having a real estate company, I connect with what you're saying. But honestly, I don't think I had the awareness. So I was 28 when I started this. I was prepared on a lot of these levels, but looking back at that 28-year-old mark, I had a lot to learn. And so, but the good thing is that you were self-aware and you were still focused enough to go out and learn these things, to prepare yourself to build, to do it. I mean, that's unique.
Probably.
It is. Like, it's not, so you can still be humble and say it. I'm around a lot of business owners now. That's unique because what happens to a lot of people is they just say, probably not for me. They go to corporate America and they stay there forever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Something about the risk, something about the self-awareness, not liking to acknowledge we have some weaknesses. So I'm excited to hear more of this. So we have innovation, being an entrepreneur, and then being a manager and then a leader.
Yep.
You recognized at some point, I bet then you couldn't identify this was the 4 pillars to have a multi-billion. You didn't know that.
Nope.
You've learned and identified these things.
Yep.
But if you didn't have these then, you just knew, like, I'm not ready.
Yeah, I knew that people wouldn't just hand me the keys. Yeah. I mean, the simple question is, would I be able to recruit? And you could, but would I be able to recruit somebody who was 10, 20 years ahead of me? And, what would it take for me to lead them?
Yeah.
Not direct them.
Yeah.
To lead them. Mm-hmm. And why would they listen to me except they think I might be smart or I might started it? Yep. I think there was a lot of those. And lucky enough, in the earlier startup phase, we had those kind of people, and I could see the challenge of truly leading where they give everything, not just because they have to be here with this young guy or whatever that turns out to be.
So what happens then? So when you say, probably not right for me to have my own startup, because you probably could have raised funding.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
3 million, 5 million, whatever. You could have gotten different series of funding.
Yep.
So what do you do then?
So, so then I said, and this is probably a little bit of mistake. I said, well, I got to go to a business school maybe, and that might be a path that somebody would allow me to go into the business side of it. Because, you're still a technical guy, led more R&D activities, was still more on technical. While you can think business guys, nobody's going to give you in the job. So that was the point, and that's when the detours happened. I was got into a business school. I was gonna start. My brother, who was hearing impaired, gets into bad accident, so we can't move out of the city, the other city that I need to go to a business school for. So I go get my second master's in industrial engineering planned because that's industrial, and then I do management of technology. That feels like an MBA type of thing, and I created that, and that's what I went and did. And I'm like, okay, spend 2 semesters, get that done. That gets me, and it did. And I was very quite sure of what kind of a job I wanted to have.
Okay.
I wanted to get into, it's gonna sound funny. I wanted to get into the GE's operations leadership program.
So why? You identified that program as a development program?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Because it was leadership development program. There is no company at that point in the role.
Was that when Jack Welch was leading the company?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there are the people that, looking back, who knows whether ML broke it down? I don't know, right?
Yep.
Whose fault it was, and did Jack have amazing leadership? I mean, there's significant things that he did well, but there are significant people that came out of that leadership program in that company.
Yeah.
So that you targeted that and said that thing.
Yes.
There were skills that were going to be learned there.
Exactly.
Wow. So you target it, and so how do you get into that program?
And I didn't.
There you go.
They rejected me.
Okay.
You'll be amazed how many times I've been rejected by GE, but that doesn't matter. But then I thought Siemens had the similar program.
Did they?
Yeah, they did.
Did they reject you?
No, luckily they took me in. And that was also by accident. They probably would have rejected me. I just walked into that interview slot at that point that there was open, and I said I want to have a conversation. The guy or gal loved me, put me in front of VP of Operational Excellence. She thought I could do something, and they put me in.
So off to Siemens you went.
There we go.
So how long after you went and were in business school did you get the job at Siemens?
I was not in a business school. I finished my industrial engineering. Right after that, I got into it. So it was 1 year.
Okay.
And then I did my MBA part-time just because
That's what you're supposed to do.
It. Yeah.
And they probably paid for it.
They didn't.
Siemens didn't?
They could have, but I paid it for myself. I thought, it gives me an option.
You're not committed then, huh?
Exactly.
Right. Okay. All right. So how long were you at Siemens?
I was there for about 3 years, and learned tremendously. I think I had great mentors, business turnaround part of it. A lot of great things, the things that I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
I didn't think I would actually go to startup even at that point, but I did tell. So this is funny. Probably about second month of my, in the program, I was bored as hell.
At Siemens, yeah.
I was bored as hell. I'm like, the role doesn't move, So I go to a VP of one of the business, and I said, I'm super bored. He goes, what do you want to do? Because I came from a startup, and I said, look, if I don't get to a certain point that I want to get to it in about 10 years, I told him directly, I was so naive, then I'll leave and I'll do a startup.
What did he say?
He said, he told me, he said, look, don't think one thing is harder than others. They're both difficult, but in a different way. And at that point, I didn't realize that.
That's a smart guy.
But after I spent enough time in corporate, I realized that role is also not easy. The challenges are completely different. Mm-hmm. A startup role is also not easy, that we all know. But the challenges that are different.
Remind me to get back to those as we evolve to this entrepreneur thing, because I think that's important with, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, everybody wanted to be like a sports star, or wanted to be a lawyer, or wanted to be a doctor, or wanted to be an engineer. And I remember when I was like a sophomore in high school, and MIT sent me the book of all the classes, because I had this engineering mind. Nobody in my family was, but I thought I wanted to be an engineer of some sort. And so I was reading through it, and they would contact me, and don't know if I would have gotten in, but I never applied. But now it seems like these generations now, they want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But they have no clue what that means. True. And that's not me being mean or say they shouldn't, but they should educate themselves
Yeah.
about what they're honestly going to look at. So I'm going to, later on, I'd like to bring it back to the difference of the hard corporate America and the hard entrepreneurship piece.
Yeah.
So what the heck do you do after Siemens?
So after Siemens, I also got tired of Siemens for completely different reasons. We wouldn't get into it in the public
We don't have
domain.
to. We love Siemens. That's all we're going to say.
I
Yes.
love Siemens.
Yes.
And I do.
Yeah.
I think I still, my first mentor, I still
You're
tell
connected.
her how much I appreciated what I've learned. I get a call. Well, okay, in between, here's the part about GE.
Mm-hmm.
Even while I was Siemens, I said, okay, I want to go back to GE. That's the leadership place, right? That's where you go learn leadership. So I apply into what they had is called Experienced Commercial Leadership Program. This is the people who have a couple of years of experience and an MBA, and you get in and you get fast track. So I get for an interview, go up to the Crotonville, they interview me. I'm just and then they said, nope, you're not getting in. And I sent a quick note, appreciate it. And obviously it's highly competitive. You have all these Harvard MBAs and Wharton MBAs, and they all go. And I didn't think I was that smart enough, but I still wanted to know why not. And they said, you're in the middle of the pack. That's all they said. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not good enough for GE again, because they keep rejecting me. But that's what I wanted to do. So luckily I get a chance to come interview for GE's aviation business here.
Okay. Where were you living at the time?
I was in Atlanta.
Okay. Yep. You went to Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech. Yeah. That's right. It was a dilemma. And the dilemma was, this was an aircraft engine business. And for God's sake, I had no idea what aircraft engine meant, except I see it hanging off the wing when I flew.
You know what the only thing you cared about? Two initials. G and E.
That's right.
You could have been designing appliances for them and you would have gone and worked there.
Probably.
Right? Let's be honest.
Probably.
Okay, so
Yeah.
GE Aviation. You get an interview.
Yeah. And then I come here and I met this gentleman, his chief marketing officer, Chad Fuller. He's my mentor. I've learned a lot from him. And he put a challenge in front of me. For what's worth, actually, that challenge is what drove me. He said, our business has done phenomenal. I think 70% of the engines, roll probably are GE engines.
Whether it's Airbus or Boeing or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, we wanted to grow beyond it. And he came in from Honeywell and other places, is chartered for it. So he goes, we need people who could help think of that. And I thought that challenge was going back to, how do I help build something and actually experience a little bit of a leadership, right? Because you're not kind of going into the same routine into the company that you're doing, but you're trying to lead something completely different.
Yeah.
And that drove me. And though I was super scared, literally, I kid you not, for first month, I was so scared. It's unbelievable. I took it on, never looked back.
So when you were scared,
Yeah.
why did you push through and not just quit and do something else?
Yeah, I can't quit. It sounds trivial, but I think there's a little bit of a pride to it, and I think it's a personality thing that somebody told me later on. But just fear of failure in many ways. It was one part, and the second part of it is, look, why can't I do it? That was more important than anything else. I think every other individual that out there, have the brains, have the things. So I do too. Maybe I just have to work harder to learn the things that I don't.
That's me.
But I can't just give it up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it was.
So we have an adage here. I think the underlying success or failure, there's so many criteria. Like we all start life and think it's these degrees. It's not to say traditional education doesn't teach us something, but it's really essential, and it's the people you meet and the connections, and you learn something new through every adventure and every endeavor. But I have found through my own experience and talking to just hundreds of entrepreneurs now, there's just one criteria that unfortunately you don't know if you have until you're in the spot. It's this thing of you got to commit and don't quit.
Yep.
So whatever leads you to like this place of, it came out of your mouth, you hadn't heard us talk about it here. You're like, well, I can't quit.
Yep.
If you can verbalize that thing, because that leads to so many other good behaviors, working extra hours, right? Competing against other people, putting in extra time. If you're not as naturally smart or intelligent, it's something you put in more time. So the Malcolm Gladwell thing of 10,000 hours.
Yep.
Do it quicker. Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Right? What he talks about, he said, hey, listen, when I was starting, whether it was PayPal or all those companies, he said, I was working 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
So I learned in a week what it took a lot of people in 2.5.
Yep.
So if you don't quit in your mind, you're willing to do these extraordinary things.
Exactly.
So you go to GE Aviation,
Yep.
and you're scared as heck for a month,
Yep.
but you just don't quit. How many times did you want to? Getting up in the morning when you're going and sitting?
Many times. It's just because the language, they talk about engines, the people, they have a jet fuel running in their bodies. I didn't.
You didn't know any of this. You knew nothing about engines, did you?
No.
Were you taught anything about engines in your education of all your years?
Nope.
Okay, I can't wait to hear this story. So
Nope.
let's talk GE Aviation and that opportunity. So that's, what years was this? When did you start there?
It's about 2006.
Okay.
2006. Yeah. Yeah. And that was phenomenal. I think I give a lot of credit to the person who hired me, Chad Fuller.
To Chad, yeah.
Yeah. And he allowed me to do, the things they're different. And luckily I was able to connect the dots and did a strategy to go beyond engine, led a $5 billion acquisition. And we're more beyond the engines. We were avionics and everything else, and that was also a little bit of a comfort zone, but not from an industry perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then obviously help start another business. But the point was, I think, and after that point, every job that I've had in GE, while running a large function or a portfolio, I ended up creating a new business.
The curious mind.
Yes. So total about, I would say, 4 to 5 businesses there.
Is that something that was that nurtured inside GE at the time? Like that was actually, hey, we have this person that wants to start or was that kind of on your own path?
No, I think that I give all that credit back to my first entrepreneurial experience.
Okay.
Because that gave me the freedom
Yep.
to think beyond the box.
Yep.
And none of those jobs said, except for the first one where we had this challenge, none of the other jobs kind of said you had to go do it.
Mm-hmm.
You could continue to do that. But I think there was the hunger of doing something different
Mm-hmm.
and solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So the senior most human resources person in the GE later on told me, he was giving me a feedback, and he was giving me actually a tough feedback. And he said, I'm going to give you 3 words for you. I said, okay. Tell me. And the classic part of giving a feedback is you got to give something positive, whether it's true or not. So he said, Pranav, you're smart. I said, yeah, scratch that out. I know.
I know where we're going. Just let's get to it.
Exactly. Let's get to the other 2 part. He goes, you're pushing your ideas very hard, and you're a rebel. And for that 20 minutes to 30 minutes I was with this individual, I didn't know how to process that. Because part of me said, isn't that the greatest thing? Because that's how you persevere. That's how you make things happen. That's how you lead, right? If you give up and if you don't challenge status quo, then you're just another guy who's just keeping and operating that building. But there was a point to it, and what he was trying to get towards is there is a cost to that in a larger environment that you have to be mindful of.
Speak to that. Speak to the cost.
The cost is, when you're in a large corporate, you're into this matrix, and everybody has a role, and everybody has an agenda because that's their role. If you push things one direction or other direction, you have to understand the implications to everybody else, because they either support the cause or they may not align to it,
Mm-hmm.
if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And there are methods of doing that. And that's the leadership part of the thing that I also wanted to learn.
Mm-hmm. Knowing how to handle these and how they can all connect.
Yeah.
And because from my experience, so I spent 6 years helping grow a national retail company before real estate. And when it's small,
Yep.
when it's organic, in the beginning, the innovation, everyone is doing what you're talking about, right?
Yep.
You're executing, you're problem solving, you're trying to find a better way for the widget to fit in every day. You're willing to probably kill something if it
Yep.
doesn't feel right to
Yep.
restart it. But once it gets so big and there's so many people and all the departments and people are protecting their areas, there takes a high level of skill
Yep.
to take that big organization and to actually make things happen, doesn't
That's
it?
exactly right.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge is for huge companies. Like I think it's brilliant things like Amazon and what they're
Yeah.
doing today.
Yeah.
It has to be a mindset from the top that
Exactly.
everyone in these leadership positions feels safe, number one.
Yep.
Right? But
Yep.
then they also feel like it's their job.
Yep.
I know I've heard from Elon Musk at Tesla. He walks around. I think he has a desk out with a lot of people working.
Yeah.
And what he says is he's like, this hierarchy
Yep.
of management,
Yep.
listen, if there's someone that's 3 or 4 levels above you,
Yep.
you have something to say to them to help impact their thing, you go do it.
Yep.
Anytime a manager tells someone, no, don't talk to me, go talk to that person, then that person, that person.
Yep.
This innovation thing,
Yeah.
it doesn't play well in corporate America,
No.
right? So when you came out of that meeting,
Yeah.
it was probably devastating emotionally for
It
a little
was.
while.
It was.
So what do you do?
I couldn't process it, to be honest with you. I think it took me a time, and I said I tried to rationalize it to myself. I said, think about Mahatma Gandhi or think about Nelson Mandela, right? They're all rebels, because you're gonna be a rebel to some, but you're doing it for a cause.
Yep.
As long as the cause was beyond you
Yep. And purposeful.
and purposeful,
Yeah.
eventually things fall in place. So that was my first reaction. But it took me a while to kind of get to another point and say, but they all paid a cost in that duration, right?
Yes. It was they paid their wife's work,
That's right.
and
That's
they
right.
didn't get to benefit
Right.
as much as other people after them,
Exactly.
Man.
Exactly.
right?
And
Were you willing to do that?
That was the point.
Okay.
While I would, the question to my mind is, and the challenge that I took it from this individual was to say, can I find a way, or can I learn a skill to not have that much of a cost and accomplish that?
Ooh.
That's hard.
Tell us what you learned. Is it possible?
It's possible on a culture, and there I would say there's a variation if you go from left to right and you look at if the company culture or organizational culture is a certain point, it is possible. But if it's at a different level, then you have to incur the cost, right? You say it and you call it investment or you call it a cost. And I think that it depends on the culture. And I can kind of we can talk about it, why some large corporations are good at innovation, building new businesses. Everybody wants to do that, right? Everybody wants to build a culture where entrepreneurs come out of there and create new innovation, blah, blah, blah. Some companies can do and most companies can't do. And the reason has to be with the culture. And I think you named Tesla. And
I think Google was one of them,
Google.
right? And I think
Yeah.
they still are.
Yeah.
I mean, they have an entire part of that business. That's all they do.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, they spend something like $1 billion a year just on creating and innovating new. Can you imagine? You should have worked in that department for Google.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a thing. But doesn't Google have that?
No, they do. They
Yeah.
do. And I think that's the phenomenal part. When you have your founder run,
Yeah.
the founder run, because founder had that.
There's a purpose behind
They
this
do.
thing.
And they try very heavy or hard to drive that type of culture in there. Once you go through a life cycle when you're 2, 3, 4 professional managers who probably didn't experience that,
Yeah.
retaining that slightly becomes difficult because it's just different environment.
So it's tough. I think what I'm hearing here is pulling all this together. It's tough to create that environment if it doesn't exist.
yeah.
It's almost like if the founder's so far gone and so far removed and there's not this same identity of purpose in the company,
Yeah.
there's probably not an outsider or some new all-star that's going to come in
Yeah.
and affect it big enough.
Yeah. But also, it's to your point, it's the people, right?
Yeah, it is.
Not everybody's wired to be an entrepreneur because they're,
They think they are.
they are.
So when you say that, when
Yeah.
they're not all wired,
Yeah.
what's the wiring that's necessary?
Good. I tell people, my days as an entrepreneur, right? You have these swings. They're crazy. You could be on a cloud 7 in the morning. You'd be down in the earth in the afternoon, and you're hoping you come right in between in the balance at the night. That swings. How many people can take that swings every day? for,
Years.
months or years, right? And even longer. That's the resiliency. And it's a question, what do you want to do in your life?
Yep.
And the purpose, to your point earlier on, is what drives you to overcome and have that resiliency. Without that, you're giving it up.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why not everybody's wired, because they have to first discover the purpose, what they're going to drive it for or towards.
That big why question, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge one out in TED Talks and huge one on YouTube when people say, hey, what's your why? But if you think more about it, being an operator, you really have to have a strong why purpose. You have to. Because there's so many times that you just want to quit.
Yeah.
It's too hard.
Yeah.
Like you just don't want to be resilient today because I've had to for the past 200 days.
Yeah.
Right? And so I describe this, like I'm excited to hear what happens after GE Aviation, but I describe this too as somebody asked me the other day, I don't get on my soapbox other than the people that are really close to me. They always have something to say about what I'm doing. But all these hours I work, a lot of people in my close sphere think I'm just nuts about how much I work.
Yeah.
And I say, guys, there's just a couple things. I'm not smarter. Like when it comes to, if me and you took an IQ test, I've never taken one. But if we took it, you probably score better. And that's not self-deprecation. That's not, you probably do. Let me go down this path.
Yeah.
But I still win against most people.
Yeah.
Because I have an extremely high pain threshold tolerance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so many other people are like, okay, that level's too painful.
Yeah.
It's just gotten to the level red here.
Yeah.
An extreme. I'm just not willing to do anymore. And so all I tell people is, hey, the reason why I haven't quit yet, I haven't reached my pain tolerance.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think the challenge is an entrepreneur, and that pain tolerance is probably aligned with what your why is, what's your purpose, what are you rebelling against?
Yep.
Like, what's the reason why you're doing this thing?
Yep.
So GE Aviation, I can't wait until we get to Meditech. I'm excited about
But
this.
I'm going to tell you something. I see you less as an operator. I see you more as a builder.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, you're a builder. Operators are keeping things going.
Yeah.
But you're building.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to Texas next week, man. We're up in Indianapolis in June.
See, there you go.
I'm hitting, I'm in San Antonio and Austin and Dallas and Houston over 5 days.
Yeah.
And then I'm coming back, and this compound effect book over my shoulder, coming back, and I'm teaching a leadership class in our company about that and how the small little micro things in life, how they compound. But maybe that's right. So you met a guy, his name is Solomon. He was in my office.
Yep.
He's our sales director in the company. He's probably our operator.
Yep.
He has his master's in education. Like, he's just intelligent. And so, all right, I'll take that. I'm the builder. All right, so I can't wait to get to where Pranav's the builder as well.
Yeah.
So you were in GE Aviation.
Yep.
How long were you there after this happened with the hot top HR guy?
The hot top HR conversation actually happened afterwards, not during that period of time.
When you started another GE business.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. But what happened after this one is, obviously I kind of got bored. I needed a challenge. Mm-hmm. And at the time, in the transportation business, our chairman announced that they're actually building, we wanted to build a hybrid locomotive. And so the CEO at that time said, well, to build a hybrid locomotive, you have to have a battery,
A big battery to push a train? I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah, exactly.
The biggest battery in the world. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So then it's like, okay, well, we got to figure that out. And so who's going to do that? And this is also the conversation about challenge. So one of the leader in GE Aviation who actually worked in M&A, he recommended my name. So I said, I go for an interview. And one of my chats knew somebody else, was running on the business in GE Transportation. So he was part of the interview. And during the interview, he asked me 3 questions. And basically what he was hinting is, do you know what you want to do, what you're really doing here? He said, Pranav, in the last year, in a review, you were fine. You're great. You did all the phenomenal things. Because, think about GE. You go from review to review to review every year. That's how you make a progress
in your file.
Career.
It's just handed from the next person, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he goes, you're fine, but you know what you're going to write next year? By the way, there's nothing here. Did you ask your boss what's the budget? Because he knew there was 0 budget to build this business.
You like that because you're like, I don't have a budget? Great. He's like, no, you have no money.
Exactly.
Okay.
So indirectly was hinting, know what you're doing? Do you really want to do it in a nicer way, right? Because he knows the GE culture. He knows, what happens in a career. And I am the guy who's crazy. And my response to that is, look, I could think about where the batteries can be used from energy storage perspective, all these places. I could make something out of it. And worst come worst, what? I'll have to find a different job.
What do you think he wanted to hear now? Because, all the higher level management positions you've had, when he was asking those 3 questions, what do you think he wanted to hear from you?
He said, I don't know. He was just hinting to say, make sure you know what you sign up on. And if you do it, make sure you ask for those things. Or maybe you have a really good thing going on there. And you. So
he thought you were going to make a mistake.
Yeah,
he didn't think this thing was the right thing for you.
Absolutely.
So did you do it?
I did it.
Is that when there was an acquisition or no? Did you make an acquisition to get that locomotive thing launched?
So we did a small technology acquisition, but it was all organic building of the business. And luckily, actually, I was able to make something out of it. We make it in GE world, we used to call Imagination Breakthrough, where we said all the places, this battery that you can make it go, wind power to backup power, all this place. And it became something that our chairman, Jeff Emmelt, and chief marketing officer would sort of program manage every period. So it became one of the biggest things.
I think I remember seeing a commercial, a GE commercial with a locomotive on it or something that was talking about green and all sorts of things.
Yep, exactly.
So what happened with the locomotive business?
So we, built the battery plant, got it funding, so on and so forth. The other part of the world, when you're in a corporate role, and I think this is where things change, right, is you have to make a conscious decision. If you're going to make your career, look, the life cycle, what I've learned is to build a business, there's a 1,000-day rule, right? Any business you start, you must give 1,000 days before really you start to see some benefit of it, at least on average basis.
3 years.
And I've seen that. And literally I've seen that. In the first one I did it, this one, 1,000 days. The next one I did it, 1,000 days in G roll. I mean, you can really count on it.
Why is that?
Because there's a lot, right? You got to figure out what you want to do. You got to be able to get people on board. You got to assess the feasibility of it. You got to get...
Is it viable, right? I mean,
viable. All of those things that you have to validate, put it together, get it ready, get the product ready before you put it to a customer who would actually take it.
Okay.
Obviously, there's, in a consumer product, the cycle could be slower, but that rate could be faster as well. It's just learning happens.
1,000 days.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So I interrupted you, but I said, because that's an important point. Because when you throw stuff out there that you've learned, it's like, okay, why is that?
Yeah.
So someone listening, this is one piece of micro advice that we're coming out. So Pranav's first piece of advice from today is, if you're going to start anything new, you've got to give it 1,000 days.
1,000 days.
Okay, let's keep going from that. So where were you? I interrupted you. What else were you doing?
No. So the point is, you figure it out after 1,000 days, right? If you want to move up in a career, you want to go run bigger business or bigger things. Otherwise, you're staying there because the rank is by the size of the business you do, right? So you kind of say, okay, you build it, you hand it on to the next person, and you go do something else. Which is not the best thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because you also want to see through it. And also you have a strategy never fully translates to the next person who inherits. And I think what you end up doing is you create a toddler that you had a vision for, but you give it to somebody else that may or may not be able to take care of it the way you do it. Sometimes they do it better than you. Don't get me wrong.
But there's no guarantee.
It's not the same vision.
Yes.
And the intricacy that needed to have, that you learn in that 1,000 days, that you can really pass on, right?
So how long do you need to stick with it? Like, that's the question, right? Because in your curious mind and in innovators' minds these days, there is like this 3 to 5 year period. It's like, build it, have somebody else run it, sell it, fund it, go public, do whatever, get an IPO, do it again.
Yeah.
And so I need to learn something from that because I'm not wired up that way. Like, that's what's weird. I'm not. My goal is to continue to scale and build this thing.
Yeah.
Because I see now, so I'm 13 years and we're just now starting to expand nationally on this. Now, there's other residual businesses, but I'm now realizing the benefits of the scale, and I'm playing on all those 10 years behind me.
Yeah.
on knowing how to do it right. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not. Somebody later on, I give a credit to all the things I've learned. Somebody later on told me, and I think it's true, and I'm generalizing, so
Yeah.
please, in the Midwest, we build for value. You go to the coast, they teach you to build for valuation.
I was going to say that. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And SoftBank, in a way, they had a mantra, right? They said, look, if you figure out a space and if you throw a crazy amount of money at it,
We work, all sorts of things.
exactly, it break loses, right?
Scale it, yep.
It comes. You throw $1 billion at whatever it is,
Yep.
you buy, you do whatever it is, you're gonna make it work.
You're going to dominate the space.
Yeah.
Figure out it's a viable space.
Right.
Dump it in there and you'll dominate.
So in today's most of the tech startups, if you will, what would they do, right? They'll throw enough money. They're not thinking about profitability as much. They're thinking about customer acquisition and how many customers you get. You throw a lot of value in the process. And what you're doing essentially is you're buying the share, and most of the times the 3 to 5 year mentality from a VC perspective, you flip it. Now it's the person who takes his responsibility. And some I've seen, because I've been in the corporate side, I've done some acquisitions. They don't, once you take it on, they don't do as well.
Why is that? Is the same thing. This passion, this purpose,
Yeah.
right? The innovator, the reason. And that may be like the person who came up with the idea. Usually you came up with the idea out of a problem solve,
Right.
right? You saw something in a business that wasn't done well. It's usually nothing brand new. I think everybody gets caught up on this thing of like Facebook.
Yeah.
There was MySpace before it, but most businesses aren't brand new. Aren't
Yep.
they like a re-evolution
Yeah.
of the business?
Yeah. You had Friendster, MySpace.
Yes, you just found a way to do it better.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I've talked to some of these VC guys. I talked to some of them now, and they don't mess around. And maybe there's multiple ways to skin the cat,
Yeah.
as they say.
Yeah.
But something inside of me, it must be this Midwestern thing.
Yeah.
It's something about it. To me, honestly, it doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right.
It just doesn't. And maybe it is. Make $1 billion, but it doesn't feel right.
No. I this is a hypothesis purely, but I think of it this way. If you're into a valley, right, Silicon Valley, I think it's a basic math, right? If you had a few unicorns, you made billions of dollars. Now to you, and you have that money, what you could say is, look, I could take a lot of bets and I can throw a lot of money. I just need 1 or 2 to hit another billion, and all that is done. Versus, and that is an ecosystem, didn't happen overnight. I mean, it took a time because they had series of successes before their risk appetite increased that much. In the Midwest, unfortunately, we don't have, or I wouldn't just Midwest, most of the parts. If you take
Even Chicago, maybe,
yeah,
right?
Chicago even, exactly. I mean, New York, India is coming to that point. China has that, obviously Silicon Valley has it, but rest of the world doesn't have that. So now the conservatism is higher, which also means you have to be in it for longer. The other part of the 1,000-day rule, I also think, is just like career, in a business, you also need a sponsor. And let me tell you what that, in my view, what that is, in our lives, and I always said, look, I've had all these mentors and sponsors. The sponsors are the ones who are saying, Mark, I see potential in you. You may be scrappy, you may not be there, but I see incredible potential in you. I'm going to take a chance on you. And you're also doing that during that period of 1,000 days. You need somebody to take a chance on you. And once you get a chance, you make it happen.
Yep.
And then it just starts to then you have your effect.
Yep.
But, not everybody is fortunate to have sponsors. Whether it may be in a personal career where you need somebody who gives you a chance to do something, or in a business, they take in your product or service, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, but here's the thing that there's a few fundamental things that I drive. So I didn't grow up. I grew up very poor. And you hear the story. Like, it's not unique. There's millions and millions of them. But good mom, a terrible dad. But there's nothing about my life story that says I should have gotten here if we sit and wait.
Yeah.
And so this sponsor piece is, I have empathy and sympathy for people in their lives, for situations they're in.
Yeah.
But I also know if you sit back, and I don't care if the word's a victim, I don't care
Yeah.
if it's less fortunate, if you sit back and wait for this world to bring opportunities,
Yeah.
me and you both know, and we just met recently,
No.
it's not going to happen.
No.
So you have to set your life up so that a sponsor wants to sponsor you.
Sponsor only sponsors you when he or she sees a potential in you, right? And the potential is what you gotta create. So you
100%.
gotta give 200% and be ready to be seen.
Yep.
Sponsorship is nothing. The person has to see you doing absolutely phenomenal things and think that you can do it better.
That's it.
Right?
Tremendous
They give you a
effort.
chance. But if you haven't done it, why would you sponsor? Or why would you give somebody a chance, right? Because you're putting yourself at a line.
100%. So if you hear now, I talked to an entrepreneur who sat in here, started a big retail company. If you listen to like even Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and some of those guys, they talk about it's about the person.
Yep.
We don't care what the business is. They've bought candy businesses, the furniture businesses, the Geico stuff. It's about the operator.
Yep.
And so these people, the reason why they're in a position, they're in a fantastic equity position, millions and millions of dollars, because they know that that's the thing it takes.
Yep.
Right? So they're like, okay, we need to see people. And so I don't think that it probably doesn't matter the business. There's smarter decisions on the business on what's here. Like if somebody was going and starting a physical brick and mortar retail operation today, probably challenging.
Yeah.
Right? But if you do it better, somebody's going to win that space a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So you have to find a sponsor.
Yeah.
So you found your sponsor?
You do, yeah. In our business, we do it, and every business, we found the first customer, they're your sponsor.
Funded
That's kind
the
of what I'm saying.
technology, right?
Exactly.
They have a need.
Exactly. So I think that's the journey that you take, and that's journey you have to be ready for. And I think I don't want to underemphasize the point you made. You have to be ready every one of the time. You can't say, "Oh, I'll select this one. I'll get." You don't. Because you'll get one shot, and you don't want to miss the shot.
Yep.
So you have to be ready.
So how do you know that all the failures that you had leading up to it? See, a lot of people think, well, that was my shot.
Yeah.
I missed on that one, so I'm just going to stay an employee for the rest of my life. But I mean, that's a mentality.
It is. It
right?
is. It is.
And so I think this thing that then allowed you to, like this GE healthcare.
Yeah.
Was that the final GE?
That was the final
venture?
G.
Did you go and manage an already existing business?
Yeah. I manage already existing business, but we created another business in that business. As I said, every business that I
was it robotics? Was that what it is? Like making like robotics?
So this business was about servicing the equipment, medical devices.
Okay.
GE builds the CT machines and all those sort of things. So once they've
the warranty behind it, the maintenance,
exactly. Maintenance, all those
that's
sort
where
of
all the
things.
money was.
That's where all the money is.
You'll sell the machine maybe at a loss.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Give maybe a 24-month warranty on it. After that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
For 7, 8, 10 years,
Yes.
15 years, 20 years.
Okay.
But so what we created in there was a need, cybersecurity and clinical network management, which is now you're connecting all these devices together.
Yep.
And what if that network didn't work, and if your device didn't function, and what happens to the patient? Or somebody hacks into it, what happens to the patients, right? So we created that service, cybersecurity service business in that portfolio as well, because it was natural, right? You're doing a services of this equipment. This equipment is getting connected. Hospitals really, don't have all the capabilities to be able to do it, because you know enough about equipment, you should be able to do it. And so that's how we built that one there, in that business as well.
So then in this new world, technology is becoming the driver of everything.
Yep.
Is it not?
Exactly, it is.
And so then what did you learn at your last role at GE for managing this GE healthcare? What'd you learn there?
Yeah. That job was also somewhat of a turnaround.
Okay.
Just because increasing competition, margins were shrinking, it was slightly declining. So how do you build the channels? How do you rejuvenate the portfolio? How do you lead this operational centric culture to commercial centric culture? That was the leadership part that needed to be done.
Okay.
So I think that was that. But when I was there, I think the transition part was very important. I think at that point, to me, it was a question around purpose, because I realized that I'm getting into this corporate role, which is good, and you could do another big corporate job. And most people, most people have it, like, you call it midlife crisis, not really midlife crisis in many ways, to say, you could wrapped up into this rat race in many ways, but unless you align that with what your why is, what my purpose was, it's missing. And to me, I recognize at that point in my life, what was important to me was three things. Obviously, family is very important. Intellectual challenge was second. And third one was spirituality, which is, I got to think beyond me. And so then you would say, okay, what are the things you can do to give back, right? And what I was doing before, it felt empty, which was, you'd go volunteer a little bit of time, you'll put some money in a charity, so it makes you feel good. Yeah, it makes you feel good, but it's not sustainable, right? So then my question was, what the heck do you do that's more sustainable? There's nothing more important thing you can do than create jobs, right? Because when you create jobs, you're creating opportunities. And that family benefits, that next generation gets better education benefits, and has that ripple effect.
My friendly capitalist. I love us. No, I think that's what old Charlie Munger says. I think I've heard him say that. There's no greater cause than creating a job,
yeah.
And what happens from that. So I think that, at what point in your life did you, because I'm sitting here relating to my moments, did you have reflection? It's almost like, if I get to live a full life of age, I think a full life of health is probably like 80 in my mind.
Yeah.
Like if I get to 80 and I'm healthy, I've won.
Yep.
Right. And so then if you get more years, then hey, kudos.
Yeah.
But if I have cognizant thought on my final days on earth, whatever's beyond, who knows?
Yep.
If I have that, I know I'm going to have reflection of my life.
Yep.
And on that reflection, I've read enough books by the experts. I can have intellectual thought about where I'm at now. I don't want to have regret that I could have controlled.
Yep.
And so having that awareness then, that's what allows me to structure my mind now. Like, what action do I need to take in impacting people's lives and creating these businesses so that when I get there, I'm like, I could have done something different, but damn it, I used it well.
Yep.
So I don't know. I mean, it happened to me 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So I was like 34, 35, 36.
Yeah.
I don't know why it happened.
Yeah.
But it happened. So I don't know if you had this.
No.
When does it come,
It's back of your mind, but when does it really get to a point where you start to do it? And now if I look back at it, so I jumped into it at 39, back into it. I wish I did it 10 years earlier, because the things that I needed to learn, from a leadership perspective, when I connect the dots, I think I was ready.
At 29 or 30?
Yeah, 30, 31 was a perfect time for me, because it was really been a good, but hey.
Whatever.
The best time to plant a tree was a decade ago, but second best time is now, right? That's kind of how I see it.
Yes.
And at that point, I said, I have a lot more fun building, nurturing, having an impact, and the benefit I want to see in a larger way, which is doing this. And I wanted to find something that actually does the three things. The family is just thing you do it, but something that's intellectually gonna keep me up, keep me going, right? And then if I build a business in that or try to do it, then gosh, right, I'm meeting my third
spiritually
also as well.
So what do you think this Meditech, right? So what part of that fulfills these things?
Very well. Right. So what in the Meditech Safe, what we do is we provide cybersecurity of medical devices, connected medical devices. Intellectually extremely stimulating, because you probably heard about SolarWind, you heard about Department of Defense getting rich. This is happening every day. You heard about Oddsmart water facility in Florida, where they increased the eye level and people could die. Same thing in medical devices, right? It's one thing that your health record is breached. It's the second thing when your loved one is on a ventilator and that doesn't work. So there's a purpose of, number one, it's intellectually harder, that the traditional tools don't work. So how to create a solution that's cost effective, people can use it. Intellectually, that was a challenging, so that's done. And then, from a industry perspective, that's a super need. And, and it creates a great jobs, right? Cybersecurity is such a shortage, the jobs you create. So I think that kind of all comes together, that you have an impact in people's lives, you're solving a big problem, and hopefully you're building the business that actually creates a lot more jobs. And solves the problem.
So
comes
is
together.
was Meditech, is it an interrupter?
Help me with that word.
Well, so is it, because I'm asking you something that I don't like when people say it to me, but are you innovating,
Yeah.
taking something that's already working well and just doing it a little bit better? Or are you coming into a business and saying it's wrong?
Disruptive.
So there you go.
Flipping upside down.
100%, right?
Flip it upside down.
So interrupting it, disrupt, or whatever it
Yep.
is. So you're flipping it upside down.
Yep.
How's that being received?
Hard. Very, very hard. I'm not here to say it because it's a journey of educating the market. Who needs to take part into it?
Yeah,
how
who-
they
who-
need to approach it.
Yeah, who are you educating? Are you educating the doctors? Are you educating the executives, the business managers running hospitals?
Great question. I need to educate the executives running the hospitals. Doctors need to be educated, but in today's healthcare world, unfortunately, as soon as this becomes an administrative thing to do, they pass it on to the administrator just because the liabilities from an insurance perspective, theirs is really passed on. So they realize it, they think it's a big risk, but they're saying, hey, look, this is what the administrative team should be able to do. But this needs to be educated to the general management than the specialist who is doing an IT part, because the implications are broad and solution is broad. But historically, what happens is people perceive it as a technical problem and they give it to a technologist, versus you take a step back and you look at that. The SolarWind thing that happened, why did that happen? It's because they had a password SolarWind 123, and that was openly shared by the team. And that's how people got in. So it's a human factor. So the point being is the way you would address it, it's relatively broader. But unfortunately, right, you got to be able to take those leaders and say, listen, this can be solved differently, and can be solved at half a cost that it would have cost you otherwise.
So is that your call to action? But here's the first: they have to care. They have to care.
Yeah.
With any business first, because the consumer isn't going to fight for you. Because if we're going in and getting some medical, we don't even know that's happening.
That's right.
Right? So we don't care. So you're not going to have an upheaval of society that says you better upgrade your technology. So it either has to be a liability from a cost standpoint from them that they have to address.
Yep.
Or they have to care to make something better.
You got it. You got it.
So are you playing on both of those things? I mean...
You're right. So I would say both. So we're educating. There is a liability increasing, but that's where, as a system, we're not ready. So three things, right? Unless and until consumer cares, who wants to spend an extra dollar of a cost?
No business person.
Exactly. And so somebody, I wouldn't name the name, but one of the chief information security officer of
A large hospital system.
one of the best in the nation said, Pranav, no VIP has died.
There it is.
And I'm like, are we waiting for that to happen? But his point was,
He knows it.
exactly.
But what's going to cause somebody from a budget standpoint to say, you're allocated $50 million?
Yeah. And my challenge going back to that is, so then his point was, I don't have a budget. And my point was, well, I don't need him to give you more budget. I need him to listen to what needs to be done. Because if he does that, guess what? The budget that you guys think that it would cost.
How much is it going to cost you later?
It wouldn't. No. How much would it cost? But there are solutions out there that actually would not require you to spend more. Maybe you might actually get a productivity out of it. You just need to do it differently. Flip.
With creating the efficiencies in the
Exactly.
systems. So where do you find their ear? Because they're so busy.
Yeah.
Like go back to when you were at GE.
Yeah.
And how busy you were on the functions of everything that was already in front of you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, some other
Yeah.
provider from outside is trying to get your ear
Yeah.
to say, hey, Pranav, you need to do it different.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's tough, right?
Very hard. Very hard. Very hard. And that's why, okay, now we're going to industry. If you look at what's happening in the cybersecurity as an industry, forget about anything else, you'll realize a few things. You realize most of the companies that are in there, right? Some of them are growing. There are more companies, they're spending more. Many of them are not profitable. Some are profitable. Many are not. The reason being is they're all in anticipation of people to wake up. And guess what? I think people are waking up now. And it took them to things like solar, wind, and others, where now government is saying, look, I think the damage is pretty big, and we're going to have to put some regulations.
So it's going to be required.
It would have to be required. So, for example, if you're in defense side of it, they're
Yes.
saying, Department of Defense is saying, everyone in my supply chain has to comply to what we call cybersecurity maturity model certification. So, and so on behalf of the citizens, when there is a risk, there are two ways it can happen. Either you go and scream and say, look, I'm not going to take this service unless you take care of it because it's a cost from business. Or the government has to say, for the betterment of everybody else, we need to have this. As soon as you do that, here's what we do great in business, right? Now I have a problem that I have to meet this. I'm going to become very creative of finding a solution that's cost effective and works, and you get to an equilibrium point. But unless and until you drive those two areas, it's hard for people to act with the tenacity that you need them to do that. And it just, okay, we'll do it tomorrow. We'll do it tomorrow.
So what happens if, not to reduce what they've accomplished, but what happens if you're falling on the sword to create this change and you don't benefit?
I think that's a great point. That's called entrepreneurship. You're not in it. And I tell you, most of the times, that's my belief, most of the times, most people don't become entrepreneurs thinking they're going to be billionaires. Most of the times, they go into it for multiple reasons. Number one, I've got this, I see this, it needs to happen, nobody's doing it, I want to do it. Or I'm just so tired of the way the other things are happening, or my life is going, I need a charge, I want to do this. I mean, there is that reason. Typically, it's not that I want to make $1 billion.
It's not usually monetary.
Exactly. And the same thing for us. Look, if the role gets to where it needs to get to, and you don't get a benefit of it, so be it. On
to the next thing.
Yeah, you'll find something else to do it. But the role needs to get to the better point. I mean, that's the point.
So how do you make that happen? So you're probably the right guy, and people like you because what the head HR manager said to you, right?
Yeah.
Right? You're somewhat a rebel.
Yeah.
Well, it takes someone with that mentality to force this type of change.
Yeah.
But
we don't like that.
But here's the thing. Like, how long do you keep beating down these doors? Like, do you do it for 10 years? Do you do it for 15 years? How do you tell an entrepreneur when it's time to quit? Because me and you said don't quit. But how do you know when?
There are few signs. Number one, the day you realize that the purpose that you're driving towards is wrong, or the day you realize somebody and some other solution can be better than yours, the day you realize either you ran out of the resources that you can't go for and you don't have a support structure, those are at least that's how I see it. Mm-hmm. My way of saying, look, if I know that I'm wrong, then I want to quit to find something else. Wrong in the sense, my purpose, my solution, whatever that turns out to be. But if I know and if I can prove it every day that I deliver better value, I can't quit just because people haven't seen it. I need to work harder for them to see the story. Sometimes as a small guy, you may not get a chance. You just need that one guy or a gal who would say, let me listen to it, let me see it, and then I'll judge and I'll tell you what that is. So I think that the test point you have is you need a very honest feedback of whether what you're working on is not right. First. Second, you need to get a sense of the runway. Runway sometimes, is hard to predict. Look, I try to predict in all the things that I've done, either I'm too early or too late. And that's why you have this 1,000-day rule, right? Predicting market is beyond you.
Any of us, anyone.
Right? Because the sale, you can try to sell it, but the other person has to be ready to buy it. So that you just have to keep playing it. And the last one is, look, if you run out of resources and you don't have any support, unfortunately, that's many times many companies die just because of the timing issue. Not that they don't have a passion, not they don't have, a good idea, none of those things. And you have to learn to accept because the life is very uncertain.
Yeah. It's kind of like VR, the VR world. Yeah. Think about how much money has been in VR for the past 10 years. Right?
Yeah.
And it hasn't evolved. Now, COVID's changed a few things, but it hasn't evolved as quick as some people projected.
Right.
So then probably some people start falling off.
Yeah.
Right? Because the people stop funding. VC's like, you know what? We're too early. It's neat to sit in your living room and do it, but we're not living that way yet.
Yep.
Right? So maybe that's an example of the world and what's happening.
Yeah.
So what should a guy like Mark or anybody else sitting in this seat, what should I ask you that people don't?
Mark, I think it's the question is a great way. I would say, it has to be around what drives you, or what two things that you think you learn that you can share with people, right? And I'm
So Pranav, what are the two things that you've learned and that you can share with us? So what are they?
The two things is, the first thing is you have to, the outcome often is not controlled by you, unfortunately or fortunately. But input is what you control. And because outcome, market doesn't fall in place, something uncertain happens, you just don't. But you control your input, and if you are not committed to your input, and if you fall short to it, you'll blame yourself every day if you really believed in it. So if you don't do it, right? And let the output fall in place. If it works in your favor, great. You would actually see the result. If it doesn't, you'll have at least a personal satisfaction that you did it the best you could, and so I think that's the first thing. Second, just be intellectually honest of what you want out of your life. At the end of the day, most of the decision, if you can tie it back to what you want out of your life, I think what you said earlier on, when you reflect back and think what's important to you, if you figure those two things out, I think you got a mission, and entrepreneurship would flourish if that was the path that you choose to do it. One way or the other, you'll get something out of it for sure.
Yeah. So Cincinnati.
Yeah.
What the heck, right? Are you staying here forever? Like, is this it?
Cincinnati is where I've lived the longest in my life till date. And believe it or not, so now I can officially call it, there's one place that I've lived the longest is Cincinnati, I'm a Cincinnati guy.
Welcome. Compare, how long did you live in India when you were growing up?
17 years.
Okay. So enough to really to know it.
Yeah.
It's not like you left when you were 6 and I don't know. Compare, I'm assuming, with all the GE experiences at Siemens, you've traveled a bunch of cities around the world, I'm assuming, right?
Yep.
Why stay in Cincinnati? See, I love it.
Yeah.
But why?
Here's the thing. People say, why not San Francisco? Why not New York? Why not London? Whatever, right? And I tell them, those are the fantastic places for me to go visit. Novelty is only novelty till you keep it novelty, but to raise a family, to live, have a great standard of living, Cincinnati got everything. Look, we got it. It's a city. It's not a town. We got restaurants. We got culture. We got teams. We got commute isn't all that bad once they fix this 75 thing, by the way.
Yes.
But commute isn't too bad. You got a good airport. You can fly wherever you want.
Traffic's not.
Yeah. So I think for living,
it's incredible, isn't it?
It's the best place, and just travel to wherever you want to.
Yeah, we don't want them to come here though, like what's happening to Austin and to Texas, though, right? The Californians are leaving California and going, all right, guys, just come visit.
Yep.
So an actor, Emilio Estevez, just came out in Vanity Fair last week, and he lives in Cincinnati now for the most part. He grew up in Dayton, and this whole Vanity Fair article was about Cincinnati and why it's so amazing. Yeah. But at the end, he said, please only come and visit. We'd like you to leave. So, because we don't want to change. When Amazon's Prime Air hub, one of their 2 or 3 hubs is here at CBG now.
Yep.
It's great for the economy. They actually, so I own the building too. Oh. And so they lease space in the building. And remember they had their search for another headquarters outside of Seattle.
Yeah.
And New York ran them off, and they're going to be in D.C. But there were these Midwestern towns that qualified for like the last 10 or 15. And they honestly looked here. They were looking at a space in Newport. There was this whole project, and everybody was excited about it. But I went, do we really know what that means?
Right.
I mean, really? Because if you have the same, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm all about development. I'm all about moving forward. But I like what we've got. It's evolving. It is really, we call it culture around here.
Yes.
Not culture, we call it culture. So come and visit Cincinnati. Do you have a lot of family still in India? Do you have family in other cities?
Believe it or not, I do have family in India.
Yeah.
I do have family in Chicago, St. Louis. I actually have more extended family in Cincinnati.
I was going to say, do they come and visit here? I was going to ask what they thought about it.
Yeah. Well, they come and visit, and some actually moved here.
Yeah.
So.
All right. I love it. So this is exciting. So what can we, so Mike, our producer, when this is finished, he's going to put all your contact info and your Instagram stuff and all that. But from a Meditech perspective, how can people, is there anything that the average normal consumer, normal people in the world can do to engage with you, or it really is higher level managers in hospital systems and
No.
what can the average human being,
how
can we engage with your evolving
mission.
company and mission and technology?
I'll tell you a few things to think about this. 70%, 70% of cyber incidents involve human factors. Now with the medical technology, you have a lot of variables, you believe or not. If you're home health, so you are not just in the hospital, but you're living with a machine that's connected around you. And you need to understand operation of those or how it could breach, because it could have, adverse impact in your environment. Follow us on a LinkedIn. We do webinars for general people. Ask questions. Actually, we've done a great job in terms of writing a lot of articles on knowledge centers. Ask questions. I guarantee you, if you dropped us an email, I'll personally engage with you. I think there is a lot as a people that we need to learn. Yes, the corporates need to do it, but your homes are fully connected, believe it or not. Your cars, we're going to have a autonomous car going. All that connectivity is part of your life. And cybersecurity, don't leave it for techies, because we contribute a lot to it than what we think. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be educated. What we've done is we've actually launched a game we call Meditech, and the sole purpose of that game is it's a trivia-based game, but it teaches you around healthcare and teaches you around cybersecurity. And we're going to have it's just more for people, general people to be aware.
So is it MEDI agent?
MEDI agent. You can download it in from Google, an Apple as well as Android.
Okay.
And you can play it on our website, meditechsafe.com, and we have a page onto it. You can page that, and we're actually going to have a lot more cool games that we're built on that, so you can play with your friends and family, but you're learning cybersecurity.
Mike, man, I know we're going to be doing it at midnight, man. We can't sleep. We're going to be pulling up the website. We're going to be playing us some games. It better be a good game.
It's educational, but it's going to get better over the period of time.
It better be fun. We want fun and entertainment. If I'm going to turn off Amazon and Netflix and not do all the stuff we do in tech, it better be fun. Okay, Mike, we're going to come back with an update on if the Meta Agent game was fun.
Meta Agent, you're going to be an agent.
An agent, okay. All right, we can relate to that. We're real estate agents in this company. Hey, thank you for coming in.
I appreciate it.
This conversation is, I think, an intellectual perspective on entrepreneurship, someone that has a ton of experience in the corporate world, and then also connecting that in our minds with entrepreneurship. It gives people perspective. What we're trying to do is help people make an educated decision and help them process like the path of their life, the decisions they want to make, and to try to draw a conclusion and create a path and like go and chase it down and make it happen regardless of the failures you face. And so no matter the path you start out on, don't quit. Stick with some things. Have some grit, some determination. And even if it ends up failing after 1,000 days or 2,000 days, there's something you're going to learn, and you can probably pick it up and create a great life for yourself and make impacts on people. So,
absolutely. And Mark, I must tell you, I think what you're doing is phenomenal. I think people need to understand what it takes to do it, and not to discourage them, but to be prepared for them. And everybody has their own journey and own learnings that they can share. But if folks can pick one or two things and create their own journeys and benefit from it, has a tremendous value. You're a multiplier.
Thank you. You're amazing. Mike Boyd, our great producer. Thanks for finding this brilliant guy. And Cincinnati's amazing. Come work. I'm sure Pranav has fantastic jobs and careers and opportunities.
Absolutely, we do.
Okay. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Okay.